They called me ungrateful when I stopped paying their bills and cold for refusing to fund my stepbrother's delusions. For 3 years, they gave me silence. But when my stepfather arrived at my estate in a cheap rental, he didn't come to apologize. He came to lecture. Yet, as the massive door opened to reveal my $15 million view, he froze. I realized then that revenge isn't loud. It is a fortune they can never touch. My name is Edith Fairbanks. I am 30 years old. And on paper, I am a forensic data architect at a firm called Obsidian Shield. It is a sterile, impressive title for a job that is essentially professional paranoia. My days are spent combing through terabytes of corporate financial data, looking for the digital fingerprints of embezzlement, money laundering, and executive fraud. I see the things people think they have deleted. I find the money that people think they have hidden. I am paid a very comfortable salary to be the person who notices when the numbers do not add up. In the high-stakes world of corporate security, I am a weapon, but in the drafty, beige-carpeted living room of my childhood home in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, I was nothing more than a utility, a human extension of the Wi-Fi router or the tax software. For years, my life had been a study in compartmentalization, from Monday to Friday. I lived in a small, meticulously organized apartment downtown. I wore tailored blazers, drank black coffee, and saved my clients millions of dollars. But every Sunday, like a clockwork mechanism that I could not seem to disable, I drove 45 minutes back to the crumbling colonial house where my mother, Marilyn, and my stepfather, Arthur, lived. The drive itself was a weekly ritual of dread. As the city skyline faded into the gray, flat sprawl of the suburbs, I could feel my posture slumping. I could feel the sharp, analytical edge of my mind dulling into a blunt instrument of submission. I did not go home to eat my mother's cooking. I did not go home to catch up on family gossip. I went home because, in the ecosystem of the Fairbanks-Miller household, I was the designated fixer. I was the grease in the gears that kept their chaotic, mediocre lives from grinding to a total halt. I was not the daughter who brought flowers. I was the daughter who fixed the printer because Arthur refused to learn how wireless networks worked. I was the one who spent hours on the phone with the IRS because Justin, my 33-year-old stepbrother, had tried to claim his video game console as a business expense again. I filed their taxes. I disputed their bank fees. I removed the malware from Arthur's laptop after he clicked on links promising him miracle hair growth or easy riches. I was the janitor of their digital and financial messes, cleaning up the spills they left behind without ever receiving so much as a thank you. Arthur was a man whose ego was inversely proportional to his competence. He had spent his life bouncing between mid-level sales jobs, always convinced he was the smartest man in the room, always bitter that the world failed to recognize his genius. He treated me with a specific brand of condescension reserved for women who were more successful than he was. To him, my career was just typing. He would wave his hand dismissively when I tried to explain my work. "It is just staring at a screen, Edith," he would say. "It is not real work. Real work is out there in the world, shaking hands, making deals." And then there was Justin. If Arthur was the architect of his own mediocrity, Justin was the contractor building it. At 33, Justin was a permanent adolescent, a man who had never held a job for longer than 6 months because he had problems with authority. He lived in the finished basement, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and whiteboards covered in scribbles that he called roadmaps. Justin did not have a career. He had projects. He had gone through a drop-shipping phase, a day trading phase, and a sports betting phase. Currently, he was rebranding himself as a visionary in the world of cryptocurrency and non-fungible tokens. To Arthur and my mother, Justin was a budding entrepreneur just waiting for his big break. To me, he was a statistical inevitability of failure. But that particular Sunday was supposed to be different. I had spent the previous 6 months working on the most grueling case of my career. A mid-sized tech conglomerate had been bleeding cash, and their internal audit team could not find the wound. I had spent nights sleeping under my desk, living on vending machine crackers, tracing a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. In the end, I found it. I uncovered a siphoning scheme that had directed nearly $50 million into the CEO's personal holdings. My discovery saved the client from a massive shareholder lawsuit and possibly bankruptcy. The rewards were immediate. The partners at Obsidian Shield called me into the corner office on Friday afternoon. They did not just give me a bonus, they gave me the keys to the kingdom. I was promoted to regional director of the Western Division. It came with a salary increase that made my knees weak and a relocation package to Park City, Utah. I was going to be running my own team, living in the mountains, thousands of miles away from the gray skies of Ohio. I wanted to share this. Despite everything, despite the years of neglect, the snide comments, the servitude, there was still a small, pathetic part of me that wanted my mother to be proud. I wanted to see Arthur's eyes widen with respect. I wanted, just once, to be the golden child. I stopped at a specialty wine shop on the way to the house. I bought a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon that cost $200. It was a ridiculous extravagance for a Sunday dinner that would likely consist of overcooked pot roast. But I wanted the prop. I wanted to pour the wine and make a toast to my new life. When I arrived, the house smelled of stale air and boiling cabbage. The television was blaring in the living room. Arthur was in his recliner, scrolling through his phone with his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose. Marilyn was in the kitchen, looking harried as she stirred a pot of gravy. Justin was nowhere to be seen, likely lurking in the basement. "I am here," I announced, setting the heavy wine bottle on the dining table. The thud was satisfyingly solid. "Oh, good," Arthur called out without looking up. "The internet is slow again. Can you look at the router after dinner?" "I cannot stream my show." I swallowed the irritation rising in my throat. "Hello to you too." "Arthur, yes, I will look at it." I went into the kitchen to help my mother. She looked tired, her hair fraying around her face. "Hi, honey," she said, offering me a distracted cheek to kiss. "Set the table, will you? Justin will be up in a minute." Dinner began in the usual fashion. Arthur complained about the government. Marilyn fretted about the price of groceries. I sat there, clutching the stem of my wine glass, waiting for an opening. The expensive wine tasted like vinegar in my mouth because of the tension in my jaw. Finally, during a lull in Arthur's monologue about gas prices, I cleared my throat. I sat up straighter, channeling the authority I used in boardrooms. "I have some news," I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Big news, actually." Arthur looked up from his plate, fork halfway to his mouth. Marilyn smiled politely. "What is it, Edith? Did you finally meet a nice man?" I gritted my teeth. "No, Mom, it is about work. I just closed the biggest case in the history of my firm. I saved a client from a $50 million lawsuit." I paused, waiting for the impact. $50 million. It was a number that should have commanded silence. "That is nice, dear," Marilyn said, reaching for the salt, before I could continue, before I could tell them about the promotion or the move to Utah. The basement door banged open. Justin bounded into the room, his face flushed, holding his phone up like a holy relic. He was wearing a t-shirt that said "HODL" across the chest. "You guys are not going to believe this," Justin shouted, drowning out the silence I had tried to cultivate. He practically vibrated with excitement. "I did it! I finally did it!" Arthur immediately shifted his attention, his eyes lighting up in a way they never did for me. "What is it, son? What happened?" Justin shoved his phone into Arthur's face. "The NFT project. The pixelated monkey collection I told you about? I just sold one. It is official. I am a professional digital artist." Arthur slammed his hand on the table, beaming. "I knew it. I knew you had the vision." I stared at them. I felt a cold numbness spreading through my chest. "Justin," I asked, my voice cutting through the noise, "how much did you sell it for?" Justin smirked at me, the arrogance radiating off him. $500. Edith, $500 for a JPEG. How is that for typing?" I did the math instantly. I knew about this project because I had seen the charges on Marilyn's credit card statement when I did her monthly reconciliation. Justin, I said, my voice dead calm. You spent $2,000 on minting fees and gas fees to create that collection. You used Mom's credit card 3 weeks ago. If you sold one for $500, you are not making money. You are currently operating at a net loss of $1,500. That is not a business. That is a leak. The room went quiet. For a second, I thought logic had won. I thought Arthur would realize that his stepson was burning money while his stepdaughter was saving corporations from ruin. Arthur turned to me, his face twisting into a scowl. Always with the negativity. Edith, can you not just be happy for your brother for once? It is simple math. Arthur, I said, pointing at Justin, he lost money. It is not about the math, Arthur snapped. It is about the potential. It is about being an early adopter. Justin is creating a brand. He is a trendsetter. Who cares about your boring spreadsheets and your corporate nonsense? Justin is out here making things happen. He turned back to Justin, raising his water glass. To Justin, the first big sale. This is just the beginning. Son, Marilyn chimed in, her voice shrill and eager to please. That is wonderful, Justin. I am so proud of you. They clinked glasses. My $200 bottle of Cabernet stood unopened in the center of the table. Ignored. The promotion. The title of regional director. The view of the mountains. It all died in my throat. I looked at them. Really looked at them. I saw Arthur's foolish pride, enabling a man-child. I saw Justin's smug, unearned victory. I saw my mother's desperate need to keep the peace at the expense of reality. I was about to stand up. I was about to tell them I was leaving. I was about to say the words that would burn this bridge to the ground right then and there. Edith, honey, my mother said, turning to me as she set her glass down. I looked at her, a flicker of hope reigniting. Maybe she realized. Maybe she saw the insanity of toasting a loss while ignoring her daughter's triumph. Since you are already up, Marilyn said, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen. Could you take a look at the dishwasher? It started making this awful grinding noise this morning. I tried to kick it, but that did not work. I stared at her. Mom, I was telling you about my promotion. I know, she said, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. But the water is not draining, and the smell is getting terrible. You are so good with machines. You have that logical brain. Just take a quick look. It would save us calling a repairman. You know how much they charge. Arthur laughed. A wet, hacking sound. Yeah, Edith, make yourself useful. We need to discuss business strategy with Justin here. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was not a dramatic explosion. It was the quiet, final sound of a cable severing under too much weight. I did not scream. I did not throw the wine bottle. I simply stood up. Sure, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. I will take a look. I walked into the kitchen. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. Casting a sickly yellow pallor over the room, I could hear them in the dining room. Arthur asking Justin about blockchain scalability, using words he definitely did not understand. And Justin spinning a fantasy about buying a Lamborghini next year. I approached the dishwasher. It was an old unit, white plastic yellowed with age. I could smell the stagnant water from where I stood, a mix of rotting food and mildew. I looked down at my clothes. I was wearing a silk blouse that cost $300 and wool trousers that I had bought for the partner meeting. I was the Western Regional Director of Obsidian Shield. I was a forensic architect who commanded fear in boardrooms, and here I was. I sank to my knees on the linoleum floor. The cold seeped through the fabric of my trousers. I reached out and pried off the bottom panel of the dishwasher. The smell hit me harder, making my eyes water. I reached into the damp, greasy machinery, my fingers brushing against slime and grime. From the other room, a burst of laughter erupted. It was loud, raucous, and united. They were a family. They were a unit of shared delusion and mutual support. And I was out here, on my knees, with my hands in their garbage. I found the blockage, a piece of shattered ceramic and a mass of congealed fat. I pulled it out, grease coating my manicured fingernails. I looked at the black slime on my hand. I listened to their joy, a joy that excluded me, a joy that existed in spite of reality. I am not their daughter. I thought, the realization settling over me with the chilling clarity of a forensic report. I am not their sister. I am the help. I am the mechanic. I am the bank, and I am free. I grabbed a paper towel and wiped the worst of the grease from my hands. I did not put the panel back on. I stood up, leaving the guts of the machine exposed. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to grow louder, filling the silence in my head. I looked at the door leading to the garage. I looked at the door leading back to the dining room. I knew exactly what I had to do. I did not need to shout. I did not need to explain. I just needed to vanish. I was a data architect, after all. And the data was telling me that this investment had yielded 0 returns for 30 years. It was time to cut the losses. I turned the faucet off. The water stopped with a hard plumbing shutter that vibrated through the countertop. My hands were red from the heat and the scrubbing, stripped clean of the black grease that had coated them moments ago. I dried them on a paper towel, taking my time, methodically wiping each finger as if I were removing my fingerprints from a crime scene. The kitchen was quiet now, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. Through the swinging door, the sounds of the dining room drifted in. I heard the clinking of silverware against cheap porcelain. I heard Arthur's booming laugh, a sound that used to make me flinch, but now just sounded like distant static. I heard Justin's voice, high and manic, explaining the intricacies of a digital wallet to a mother who still struggled to program the microwave. They were a closed loop, a self-sustaining ecosystem of delusion and mutual validation. I was the external power source, plugged in only when the lights flickered. I did not go back into the dining room. I did not retrieve my $200 bottle of wine. I did not say goodbye. I walked out the side door into the garage. The air was cold and smelled of gasoline and old cardboard. I got into my car, a sensible sedan that Arthur had once criticized for being too boring, and pressed the ignition. The engine purred to life. As I backed out of the driveway, I watched the warm yellow glow of the dining room window. I could see their silhouettes. They were raising their glasses again. They had not even noticed I was gone. The drive back to my apartment in Cleveland was usually a time for decompression, a time to let the tension of the visit drain away. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like an escape. I did not turn on the radio. I drove in silence, the highway stretching out before me like a black ribbon cutting through the night. My mind, usually a storm of to-do lists and anxieties about pleasing them, was shockingly clear. It was the clarity of a balance sheet that had finally been reconciled. When I walked into my apartment, I did not collapse on the sofa as I usually did. I went straight to my desk. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. I set up a new transfer rule. Then I opened the family group chat on my phone. The chat was named Fairbanks Miller Clan. It was mostly a graveyard of my unacknowledged birthday wishes to them and Justin's requests for tech support. I typed a message. I kept it surgical. No emotion, no accusations, just data. I have accepted a new position. I'm moving to Utah. My last day in Ohio will be the 20th. I hit send. I watched the screen. The timestamps appeared. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. Then, the little avatars appeared at the bottom of the message. Seen by Mom. Seen by Arthur. Seen by Justin. I waited. I sat there in the blue light of my monitor, my phone resting on the desk, and I waited for a response. A congratulations. Why? We will miss you. Even a good luck. 5 minutes became 10. 10 became 30. The screen remained static. The scene indicators stared back at me. 3 little eyes that had looked, processed, and decided that the information was irrelevant to their immediate needs. It was the most eloquent silence I had ever heard. It confirmed everything. I was not a member of the family leaving the nest. I was a utility provider announcing a service outage, and since the outage was not happening right now, they did not care. I put the phone face down. I went to the bedroom and pulled my suitcase out of the closet. The next 3 days were a blur of logistical execution. I approached my departure like a forensic audit. I categorized my possessions into 2 columns: essential and liability. My clothes, my laptop, my documents, those were essential. Everything else, the furniture I had bought to fill a space I was never at, the books I had read to impress people I did not like, the decorative trinkets Marilyn had given me for Christmases past, those were liabilities. They were anchors. I hired a high-end moving company, not to move me, but to liquidate me. I instructed them to sell everything that could be sold and donate the rest. I wanted to arrive in Utah with nothing that carried the dust of Ohio. It was on the 3rd day, a Wednesday, that my phone finally buzzed with a direct message from Arthur. I was in the middle of signing the lease termination papers with my landlord. I looked down at the notification. Arthur, moving? You did not say anything about this at dinner. Who is going to do my taxes next month? The deadline is coming up and I have a shoebox of receipts. You are so selfish. Edith, always thinking about yourself. I read the text twice. I analyzed it. Sentence 1. Feigned ignorance. Despite having read the group message. Sentence 2. The immediate pivot to how my absence inconvenienced him. Sentence 3. The guilt trip. The classic manipulation tactic he had used since I was 12. There was no question about my job, no question about where I was living, no concern for my safety, just his tax return. I felt a ghost of the old guilt rise up. A reflex trained into me over decades. He needs me. It will only take a few hours. I should just do it remotely. Then I remembered the grease on my hands. I remembered the toast to Justin's loss. I did not reply. I swiped the notification away and locked the screen. The silence from my end was not passive anymore. It was an active weapon. By the morning of the 20th, my apartment was an echo chamber. The walls were bare. The carpets were vacuumed into pristine geometric lines. My entire life was packed into 2 large suitcases and a carry-on bag. I stood by the window, looking out at the gray Cleveland slush one last time. The sky was the color of dirty dishwater. I felt a profound sense of lightness, as if gravity had released its hold on me by 10%. My phone rang. It was Marilyn. My heart gave a stupid, traitorous lurch. She is calling to say goodbye. The little girl inside me whispered, "She realized I'm actually leaving. She wants to hear my voice before I get on the plane." I picked up. "Hello, Mom?" "Edith, honey." Her voice was breathless, rushing. "Thank God you picked up. I have been trying to find the routing number for your bank account, but I cannot find it in my notes." The lightness in my chest evaporated. "Why do you need my routing number, Mom?" "It is Justin," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He found this incredible office space downtown. It is perfect for his studio. Exposed brick, high ceilings, it screams visionary. But the landlord needs a deposit by noon today or he loses it. He needs $2,000. Edith, just a short-term loan. He's going to pay you back as soon as his next collection drops." I stood there, gripping the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white. I looked at the time. My flight boarded in 2 hours. I was standing in an empty apartment, about to move across the country, and she had not even asked if I was on my way to the airport. She had not asked if I was sad. She had not asked if I was excited. "Mom," I said, "I am leaving today, right now. I am standing in my empty apartment." I know, she said, impatience creeping into her tone. "That is why I called now, before you got busy with the flight. Look, just transfer the money, okay? You know how much this means to him. Do not be difficult. We can talk about your trip later. Do not be difficult. The mantra of my childhood. Be easy. Be helpful. Be invisible." $2,000, I repeated. "Yes, 2,000. I will text you the landlord's details. Hurry, honey, please." I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of cleaning fluid and dust. "No," I said. There was a pause on the other end, a stunned, static-filled silence. What did you say? I said no. I am not sending Justin $2,000. I am not sending him 2,000 cents. I am not his bank, Mom, and neither are you, though you have not realized it yet. Edith Fairbanks! Her voice rose, shrill and shocking. How dare you? After everything we have done for you, your brother needs help. Family helps family. Family, I said, my voice cold and steady. Checks the dishwasher before they check the bank balance. Goodbye, Mom. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear her shouting, a tiny, tinny sound coming from the speaker. I pressed the red button. The shouting stopped. Then, with a few deliberate taps, I went into her contact settings. I scrolled down to the bottom. Block caller. I did the same for Arthur. I did the same for Justin. I put the phone in my pocket, grabbed the handle of my suitcase, and walked out the door. I left the keys on the counter. I did not look back. The airport was a transition zone. I bypassed the economy line, a luxury I had never justified for myself before. I walked straight to the business class check-in. The agent smiled at me, a genuine, professional smile. Heading to Park City, Ms. Fairbanks? She asked. Yes, I said. One way, sitting in the lounge, sipping sparkling water that cost more than Arthur's weekly grocery budget, I felt the final tether snap. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for 30 years began to recede, replaced by a cool, hard resolve. The flight was smooth. I sat in a pod that was larger than my childhood bedroom. I drank champagne and watched the clouds shift below me. I did not think about the text messages that were currently bouncing off my blocked firewall. I thought about algorithms. I thought about data streams. I thought about how a system, once purged of corrupt files, runs faster. When the plane began its descent into Salt Lake City, the landscape changed. Gone was the flat, oppressive gray of the Midwest. Below me, the Wasatch Mountains rose up like jagged teeth of white and granite, piercing a sky that was an impossible, brilliant blue. I stepped off the plane and the air hit me. It was thin, cold, and incredibly dry. It stung my lungs in the best way possible. It felt sterile. It felt clean. A driver was waiting for me. He held a placard with my name. Not Arthur's stepdaughter, not the fixer, just Edith Fairbanks. The car took me up the canyon, the road winding through forests of aspen and pine, buried under feet of snow. We arrived at the corporate housing complex. It was a sleek, modern building made of glass and timber. The apartment was on the top floor. I walked in and dropped my bags. It was silent, but it was not the heavy, loaded silence of the house in Ohio. This was a blank canvas. The furniture was modern and impersonal. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, a panorama of snow-capped peaks glowing pink in the sunset. I stood there for a long time, watching the light fade. I was alone. I was thousands of miles away from the nearest person who knew my middle name. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I saw the network bars searching for a signal. I had one last thing to do. I sat on the edge of the leather sofa. I took a small metal pin from my wallet. I pushed it into the side of my phone. The tray popped out. I took the SIM card, the chip that held the digital address of the girl who fixed dishwashers and filed taxes, and I placed it on the coffee table. I stared at it. It was just a piece of plastic and silicone. I inserted the new card I had picked up at the airport kiosk. The phone rebooted. The screen lit up. New network found. I did not send a "made it safely" text. I did not check my email. I walked over to the trash can in the kitchen. I swept the old SIM card off the table and into the bin. The era of noise was over. The era of silence had begun. I poured myself a glass of tap water, and it tasted like ice and iron. I drank it all, and for the first time in 30 years. I was not thirsty. In Cleveland, I was a mechanic keeping a rusting engine running. In Utah, I became the architect of a new engine entirely. My official title at Obsidian Shield was Chief Forensic Architect, but in the boardroom, They called me the Bloodhound. My job was no longer just about fixing broken code or patching leaks. I was designing the infrastructure of financial surveillance for some of the largest banking institutions in the world. I built digital labyrinths designed to trap money launderers, embezzlers, and corporate thieves. For the first time in my life, my paranoia and my obsession with detail were not treated as personality defects. They were treated as assets worth billing at $800 an hour. My boss, a man named Marcus, who spoke in soft tones and wore sweaters that cost more than Arthur's car, did not ask me to fix the printer. He asked me for my opinion on global compliance strategies. When I spoke, the room went silent, not because they were ignoring me, but because they were taking notes. The validation was a drug, more potent than the $200 wine I had left on that dining table in Ohio. It was in this rarefied air of competence and high finance that I met Leo. We met at a seminar on asset protection and blind trusts. He was the keynote speaker, a lawyer who specialized in shielding the wealth of the hyper-private from the prying eyes of the hyper-greedy. He was 35, with eyes the color of slate and a mind that worked like a steel trap. He did not look at me with the hungry, desperate eyes of the men in Ohio who wanted a mother or a maid. He looked at me with the assessing gaze of a partner. We went for coffee after the seminar. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a strategy session about life. Leo understood the language of silence. He understood that family was not always a sanctuary. Sometimes, it was a liability. When I told him about Arthur and Justin, about the dishwasher incident, he did not offer platitudes about forgiveness. He nodded, took a sip of his Pinot Noir, and said, "You need to bulletproof your life. Edith, success attracts parasites. You have cut them off emotionally, but you need to cut them off legally and financially." It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. With Leo by my side, I began to reconstruct not just my finances, but my physical self. The pale, slumped woman who had spent her Sundays kneeling on kitchen floors was gone. Utah demanded strength. I learned to ski. At first, it was terrifying, hurling myself down a mountain of ice, but soon I grew to crave the adrenaline. I hired a personal trainer who pushed me until my muscles burned and my lungs screamed in the thin mountain air. I hiked the ridges of the Wasatch Range, standing on peaks where the only sound was the wind. My skin cleared. My posture straightened. I cut my hair into a sharp, angular bob that framed a face I finally recognized in the mirror. And then came the IPO. Obsidian Shield went public 18 months after I arrived. As a senior executive with equity, the event changed my life overnight. When the market closed that first day, I refreshed my portfolio and stared at the number. It was not just money, it was freedom. My net worth had not just doubled or tripled. It had entered a realm where the price of groceries or gas was no longer a relevant data point in my consciousness. 2 years passed. The silence from Ohio remained absolute, at least on the surface, but curiosity is a human flaw, and I was not a robot. Occasionally, late at night, when the wind was howling outside my condo, I would open the archived Fairbanks Miller Clan group chat. I never posted. I never changed the read receipts. I just looked. It was a pathetic window into a stagnant world. Justin, just pivoted the strategy. The NFT market is dead, but AI-generated poetry is the future. Need investors for the seed round. Visionary Arthur. Those idiots at the dealership do not know talent. I walked out today. Their loss. I am going to consult for Justin. Marilyn. So proud of my boys. We will show them all. They were celebrating illusions. They were high-fiving each other on a sinking ship, rearranging the deck chairs while the water rose around their ankles. I would scroll through months of this. Fake wins, new debts, complaints about bad luck and haters. And then I would close the app, mute the thread again, and go to sleep in my sheets made of Egyptian cotton. They did not miss me. They missed the tech support. They missed the ATM. With the IPO money secured, Leo and I decided it was time to build something permanent. I did not want a house in the suburbs. I did not want neighbors who could look into my windows. I wanted a fortress. We found the land on the northern slope of a mountain, accessible only by a private road that required a code to enter. It was 5 acres of pristine wilderness, sitting on a ridge that overlooked the entire valley. When I stood there for the first time, breathing in the scent of pine and cold earth, I knew this was where I would plant my flag. The design process was where my background as a forensic architect truly shined. I did not just want luxury. I wanted security. I worked with the architects to design a home that was half art gallery, half bunker. We called it the Glass Fortress. The construction took 14 months. It was a symphony of concrete, steel, and triple-paned ballistic glass. I spent millions on things that could not be seen. The server room in the basement had its own cooling system and fire suppression unit. The walls were soundproof to recording studio standards. The security system was military-grade, featuring thermal cameras and iris scanners at the main entry points. But the most important fortification was legal, not physical. Leo set up the ownership structure. We created the Ironclad Trust. It was a complex web of LLCs and holding companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The deed to the land, the permits, the utility bills, everything was in the name of the trust. My name, Edith Fairbanks, did not appear on a single public document related to the property. If someone searched the county records for me, they would find nothing. I was a ghost living in a palace. The day the house was finished, a massive snowstorm was rolling in over the peaks. I stood in the center of the great room. The ceiling soared 20 feet above me. The entire south wall was a sheet of glass, framing the mountains like a living painting. The floor was polished concrete, heated from beneath so that I could walk barefoot in the dead of winter. I had spent $15 million to create this space. I walked over to the kitchen, a sleek, dark expanse of marble and matte black cabinetry. There was no yellowed plastic here. There were no leaking seals. The appliances were German engineering at its finest, silent and efficient. I poured myself a glass of vintage Bordeaux. Leo was in the library, organizing the final paperwork for the trust. I was alone in the main space. Outside, the snow was beginning to fall, thick heavy flakes that swirled in the wind. The world outside was chaotic, cold, and hostile. But inside, behind my walls of glass and my layers of legal armor, there was only silence and warmth. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like dark cherries and oak. I thought about the apartment in Cleveland with the thin walls. I thought about the car ride where I had to listen to Arthur explain why he was smarter than his boss. I thought about the $2,000 my mother had begged for. I looked around at my empire. The furniture was sculptural, chosen by a designer from Milan. The art on the walls was real, not an NFT of a monkey. Every inch of this house screamed power. It screamed competence. It was a physical manifestation of everything I had become since I walked out of that garage. I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the cool glass. The storm was intensifying, erasing the road, erasing the valley, erasing the world below. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the need to fix anything. The house was perfect. The trust was impenetrable. The silence was not empty. It was full. I was safe, or so I thought. I did not know it then, standing there in my $15 million sanctuary. But the silence from Ohio was about to break, and when it did, it would not be with a whimper, but with the roar of a cheap rental car engine struggling up my heated driveway. I took another sip of wine, watching the snow bury the world, unaware that the ghosts of my past were getting hungry, and they had just found the scent of fresh meat. But this time, the victim they were hunting was no longer there. The woman waiting in the glass fortress was a predator in her own right, and she had the home field advantage. Peace is a fragile currency. You earn it, you save it, you build walls to protect it, but it only takes one breach to devalue the entire account. For 3 years, my peace had been absolute, but chaos, I would learn, is patient. It waits for a crack. The crack didn't start in Utah. It started back in Ohio. in the basement that smelled of mildew and failed dreams, while I was sipping vintage Bordeaux and watching snowfalls from behind triple-paned glass. Justin's house of cards was finally collapsing. The visionary pivot to AI-generated poetry had failed, predictably, but Justin, in his infinite wisdom, hadn't just lost time, he had lost borrowed money. He had leveraged himself into a corner, pouring funds into a crypto exchange that turned out to be a classic rug pull. When the dust settled, he didn't just have zero assets, he had a negative balance of $65,000. For a normal person, this is a crisis. For the Fairbanks Miller clan, it was a catastrophe. I would later learn through forensic reconstruction that Arthur and Marilyn had already committed the cardinal sin of finance. They had taken a second mortgage on the house to bail Justin out of a previous scrape involving vintage sneaker arbitrage. There was no equity left to bleed. The banks were calling, the credit cards were maxed out, they were drowning, and the water was rising fast. They needed a lifeline, and then, fate, with its cruel sense of humor, handed them a magazine. I had given an interview to Wired regarding a new heuristic algorithm I had developed for detecting layered money laundering schemes. It was a technical piece, dry and dense, meant for industry insiders. I had been careful. No photos of my home, no mention of my specific location beyond the city, but the editor, in a standard biographical footnote, had included a single sentence. Edith Fairbanks currently lives and works in the resort paradise of Park City, Utah. That was all it took. The vector of infection was Aunt Paula, a distant relative on my mother's side, whose primary hobby was gossip and whose secondary hobby was judging people on Facebook. She saw the article, not because she read tech magazines, but because her son had forwarded it to her. She took a screenshot of the blurb and dropped it into the extended family group chat, a digital cesspool I had happily left years ago. Paula. Well, look at this. Little Edith is famous. Says here she is living in a resort in Utah. Heard she is making a killing. Funny she never visits. Huh? That message was the spark. Arthur and Justin were the gasoline. I can only imagine the scene in that living room, the desperation turning into opportunistic greed, the quick Google searches, the realization that the ungrateful daughter was not just surviving, but thriving. They went to work. They didn't have jobs. So they had plenty of time. They became digital stalkers. They couldn't find my home address. The ironclad trust saw to that. But they found digital crumbs. They found my name listed on the agenda for the Western FinTech Summit as a keynote speaker. They found a photo from a charity gala where I was wearing a dress that cost more than Justin's entire crypto portfolio. They did the math. Edith is rich. Edith is single. Leo was careful never to appear in my public profile. And most importantly, in their twisted moral calculus, Edith owes us. The first ping on my radar came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office, reviewing code. When my phone buzzed, it wasn't a blocked call. It was a new number. But the area code was 216. Cleveland. I stared at it. My stomach tightened. A primal reflex I hadn't felt in years. I didn't answer. Then came the text. Marilyn. Edith. Honey, it is Mom. This is my new number. I have been thinking about you so much lately. The boys and I are planning a little trip out west to see the national parks. We would love to stop by and see you. It has been too long. Can we visit? I read the message. The tone was perfect. The innocent mother, reaching out across the divide. The boys. Little trip? It sounded so wholesome. It sounded like a family trying to heal. But I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a data architect. And data architects verify before they trust. I walked out to the living room where Leo was reading a brief. Leo, I said, keeping my voice steady, I need you to run a full financial background check on Arthur Miller, Marilyn Fairbanks, and Justin Miller. Right now. Leo looked up, seeing the tension in my jaw. He didn't ask why. He just opened his laptop. Give me an hour. It took him 45 minutes. He turned the laptop around to face me. The screen was a sea of red ink. It is a bloodbath, Edith. Leo said, his voice clinical. They are insolvent. The house in Cleveland is in pre-foreclosure. Justin has 3 outstanding collections accounts. Arthur has a lien on his pension. They are not coming for a vacation. They are coming because they have burned down their own village and they need a new place to stay. They are looking for a bailout, I said, staring at the numbers. $65,000 in immediate debt, no assets. Correct, Leo said. They are desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. You should not reply. We can get a restraining order based on harassment if they show up. I looked out the window. The sun was hitting the peaks of the Wasatch, turning the snow into blinding gold. I thought about the text message. We would love to stop by. If I ignored them, they might come anyway. They might camp out at my office. They might cause a scene in public. They might haunt me for years. A lingering thread on the periphery of my perfect life. I didn't want a restraining order. That was a piece of paper. I wanted closure. I wanted to amputate the limb so the infection could never return. No, I said, turning back to Leo. I am not going to hide. I am not going to let them hunt me. I am going to invite them in. Leo raised an eyebrow. Edith, that is a risk. It is a trap, I corrected him. They think they are coming to intimidate a lonely, guilty daughter into writing a check. I want them to see exactly who I have become. I want them to see the gap between us. And then I want to close the door in their faces. I picked up my phone. I typed a reply to Marilyn. I didn't use flowery language. I didn't say, I missed you too. I am available this Sunday at 10 in the morning. Here is the location. I dropped a GPS pin. It wasn't for the house itself. That wouldn't show up on standard maps. It was for the primary security gate at the base of the private road. Do not be late. I hit send. The trap was set. They were coming for an ATM. They were about to walk into a vault. I looked at the red numbers on Leo's screen one last time. The debt, the failure, the incompetence. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settling in my chest. They wanted a reunion? Fine. I would give them a reunion they would never forget. I would give them a front-row seat to the life they had mocked, the success they had dismissed, and the fortune they would never, ever touch. I turned to Leo. Get the files ready. I want everything printed out. Every debt, every bad decision, every lie. If they want to talk about family obligations, we are going to talk about the ledger. Leo smiled. A sharp, predatory grin that matched my own. I will prepare the exhibit, he said. Sunday was 5 days away. I spent those days not in fear, but in preparation. I had the house cleaners come twice. I ordered fresh flowers, not to welcome them, but to highlight the luxury. I selected my outfit with the care of a general choosing armor. I was ready. The prey was coming to the predator, and they didn't even know they were walking into the lion's den. Sunday arrived with a sky the color of polished steel and a gentle, persistent snowfall that dusted the pines like powdered sugar. It was the kind of weather that made Park City look like a snow globe, a curated reality of perfection. Inside the glass fortress, the temperature was a steady 72 degrees. I stood in the living room, not pacing, but waiting. I was wearing a lounge set made of cashmere and silk, the color of oatmeal, which cost more than the first car I had ever owned. I was barefoot, my toes pressing against the heated concrete floor, grounding me. In my hand, I held a tablet linked to the perimeter security system. I wasn't watching the driveway with my eyes. I was watching it through a high-definition 4K feed. At exactly 9:58, a car turned off the main road and approached the lower security gate. It was a rental. A beige mid-size sedan that had clearly seen better days, its wheel wells caked with gray sludge from the highway. It looked like a smudge on a pristine canvas. I zoomed in. Arthur was driving, his face pressed close to the windshield, squinting against the snow. Marilyn was in the passenger seat, looking nervous, and in the back, slumped against the window like a bored teenager, was Justin. They pulled up to the gate. It was a formidable structure, black steel bars 8 feet high, flanked by stone pillars housing the intercom and cameras. Arthur rolled down his window. I could hear him through the system's microphone. "What is this?" he muttered, looking at the keypad. "Edith, open the damn gate." He didn't press the call button. He just yelled at the steel. "Edith, it is your father. Open up." I didn't press the override button. Instead, the automated system kicked in. A cool, synthetic female voice spoke from the pillar. "Welcome. Please scan your identification for entry." "Scan my what?" Arthur barked. "I am her father. I do not need to scan anything." "Arthur, just do it," Marilyn hissed from the passenger seat. "There is a scanner right there." I watched as Arthur fumbled for his wallet. He dropped it between the seats. He cursed. He fished it out. He held his driver's license up to the camera lens instead of the scanner. Identification not recognized. Please place ID on the glass panel. The voice instructed calmly. "Stupid machine," Arthur grumbled. He finally slapped his license onto the panel. The system processed it. It cross-referenced his name with the guest list I had authorized. Access granted. Proceed with caution. The heavy gates swung open silently. Arthur put the car in gear with a jerk, and the beige sedan began the climb. This was the part I enjoyed. The driveway from the gate to the house was a half-mile winding ascent, but it wasn't just a road. It was an engineering marvel. A geothermal heating system ran beneath the asphalt, melting the snow on contact. The road was perfectly black and dry, flanked by pristine white drifts. I watched their car slow down. They were noticing. They were looking at the road, then at the snow, then back at the road. They were realizing that in my world, I didn't shovel snow. I simply made it disappear. The car crested the final rise and entered the motor court. This was a circular plaza paved with imported cobblestones, centered around a minimalist sculpture of weathering steel. The house loomed above them, a dramatic horizontal slash of concrete and glass against the mountain. I put the tablet down on the kitchen island. It was showtime. I walked to the massive front door, a slab of solid oak that pivoted on a hidden hinge. I didn't open it immediately. I waited until I heard the car doors slam. I waited until I heard their footsteps on the stone. Then, I pushed the door open. The cold air rushed in. Meeting the warm air of the house, I stood in the center of the doorway, framed by the light from within. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I didn't step forward to hug them. I stood with my hands clasped loosely in front of me, projecting an air of absolute, impenetrable calm. Arthur was the first to approach. He was wearing a puffy winter coat that looked 2 sizes too small, the zipper straining against his stomach. His face was red from the cold and from irritation. "About time. Edith," he started, pointing a finger at me as he walked up the steps. "That gate of yours is a nuisance. You think you are the president or something? Keeping your own parents waiting in the snow?" He reached the top step. He looked up, intending to meet my eyes and bully me into submission, but his gaze drifted past my shoulder. The entry hall of my house was designed for impact. It flowed directly into the main living space, where the 20-foot glass wall revealed the entire Wasatch Mountain Range in panoramic glory. It was a view that cost millions. It was a view that stopped hearts. Arthur's mouth, which had been open to deliver an insult, stayed open, but the words died in his throat. He stopped walking. He literally froze. 1 foot on the threshold, 1 foot on the mat. His eyes went wide, scanning the ceiling height, the polished concrete, the sheer scale of the space. Marilyn came up behind him. She was carrying a large, knockoff designer handbag that I recognized from years ago. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears of performance. "Edith, honey, we made it." Then she saw what Arthur saw. Her hands went slack. The bag slipped from her fingers and hit the marble floor with a dull, heavy thud. She didn't even look down. She just stared at the view, at the furniture, at the sheer, undeniable wealth that surrounded her daughter. "Oh my God," she whispered. And then there was Justin. He pushed past his frozen parents, his phone held high in front of his face. He was live streaming. Of course he was. "Guys, you are not going to believe this," he was muttering into the microphone. panning the camera around the motor court and then pointing it straight into my house. "This is insane. My sister, yeah, the one I told you about? Look at this place. This is where she lives. We are about to go in and check out the crib. Smash that like button if you want to see the garage." He stepped up to me, the phone inches from my face. "Say hi to the stream. Edith, tell them how much you missed your favorite bro." I didn't blink. I didn't look at the phone. I looked directly into Justin's eyes. "Turn it off," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the cold air like a razor. Justin laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Come on. Do not be a downer. This is content. People love this stuff. Rich sister, humble origins." "I said turn it off," I repeated, stepping forward. "Or get off my property, now." There was something in my tone, a command, not a request, that made him pause. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw that the sister who used to fix his Wi-Fi was gone. In her place was a woman who owned the ground he was standing on. Okay, he muttered, lowering the phone and tapping the screen. "Geez, chill out. It is off." I looked back at Arthur and Marilyn. They were still standing there, shell-shocked. Arthur was blinking rapidly, as if trying to reboot his brain. The bluster was gone, replaced by a confused, hungry awe. "Are you going to come in?" I asked, stepping aside. "Or do you want to stand in the cold and stare?" Arthur swallowed hard. He stepped over the threshold, his boots leaving wet, dirty prints on the pristine floor. He looked around as if he expected someone to jump out and tell him it was a prank. "You," he started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. "You did all this? With typing?" "Data architecture, Arthur," I corrected him smoothly. "And yes, I did." I gestured to the living room. "Come in, but please, take your shoes off. The floor is heated." They shuffled out of their wet boots like obedient children. They walked into the great room, their eyes darting everywhere. At the art, at the fireplace that was 6 feet long, at the view. They looked small. They looked shabby. Against the backdrop of my fortress, they looked exactly like what they were, intruders from a smaller, sadder world, who had stumbled into a kingdom they could never understand. And I, the queen of this kingdom, watched them with cold, clinical detachment. The invasion had begun, but they had already lost the first battle. They were impressed, and when you are impressed, you are vulnerable. The great room was designed to make people feel small. The ceiling soared 20 feet overhead, and the glass walls exposed the viewer to the vast, indifferent scale of the mountains. Usually, I found comfort in this. It was a reminder of my place in the universe, but today, I used the architecture as a weapon. I did not invite them to sit. In the world of negotiation, comfort is a concession. If I offered them the deep, Italian velvet sofas, they would sink in, they would relax, they would feel entitled to stay. So I remained standing near the kitchen island, a monolith of black marble, and I let them drift aimlessly around the room like debris caught in an eddy. Arthur was the first to shake off the paralysis of awe. He cleared his throat, a loud, wet sound that echoed unpleasantly off the concrete walls. He pulled at the lapels of his cheap coat, trying to expand his physical presence to match the room. "Well," Arthur said, turning to me with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "you certainly kept this quiet. Edith, I mean, we knew you were doing well, but this is something else." He walked toward me, his hands clasped behind his back, mimicking the posture of a museum patron inspecting an exhibit. "I have to say, I am proud. Your mother and I are very proud. We always knew you had it in you. We always said, Edith is the quiet one, but she is plotting something big." I watched him. The revisionist history was breathtaking. This was the man who had told me my job was meaningless typing. Now, suddenly, he was the oracle who had predicted my rise. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. My voice was flat. I offered no bridge for him to walk across. Marilyn was hovering near the seating area. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and touched the back of the sofa. It was a Minotti piece, upholstered in a midnight blue velvet that cost more per yard than her wedding dress. "Oh, Arthur, look at this," she whispered, stroking the fabric. "It is so soft. It is like butter. This sofa alone must be worth more than our entire living room set." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and wet. "It is beautiful, Edith, just beautiful. I bet it is comfortable." She made a move to sit down. "Please do not sit," I said. The words stopped her mid-motion. She froze, hovering inches above the cushion, then straightened up awkwardly. "Oh," she said, her face flushing. "Of course. Sorry, I did not want to mess it up." "It is fine," I said, not offering an explanation. Justin, meanwhile, was prowling the perimeter of the room. He had pocketed his phone, but his eyes were still recording everything, calculating value. He stopped in front of a sculpture, a jagged, abstract piece made of bronze and oxidized copper that stood on a pedestal near the window. He reached out and tapped it with his knuckle. Ting. "Solid," Justin muttered. He looked at me. "Who is the artist? Is this a local guy or someone famous?" "It is a commission," I replied. "Why do you ask?" Justin shrugged, leaning casually against the pedestal in a way that made me want to sanitize the metal. "Just curious about the asset class. Bronze holds value well during inflation. What do you think you could get for this on the secondary market? 20 grand? 30? "It is not for sale." "Justin," I said, "none of this is for sale." "Everything is for sale, sis," he said with a smirk, finally turning to face me. "That is the first rule of business. Liquidity is king." I decided it was time to offer the refreshments. I did not ask them what they wanted. I did not bring out the $2,000 espresso machine or the vintage wine collection stored in the glass-encased cellar visible from where they stood. I took a pitcher of tap water and 4 glasses. They were nice glasses, heavy crystal, but the contents were unmistakable. I poured the water without ice. "Water?" I asked, sliding the glasses across the island toward them. They looked at the water. Then they looked at the wine cellar. Then they looked back at me. The insult landed. I saw the muscle in Arthur's jaw twitch. "Thank you." "Edith," Marilyn said quickly, rushing to take a glass as if to diffuse the tension. "I am parched. The air up here is so dry." Arthur and Justin took their glasses but did not drink. They stood on the other side of the island, creating a visual standoff. Me on one side, the fortress owner, them on the other, the besiegers. "So," I said, taking a sip of my own water, "you drove 24 hours across the country. You arrived unannounced. You have not spoken to me in 3 years. Not since you left me on red when I told you I was moving. Why are you here?" The directness of the question seemed to suck the air out of the room. Marilyn looked at her shoes. Justin looked at Arthur. Arthur set his glass down hard on the marble. "Is that how you greet your family, Edith? With an interrogation? We are here because we missed you. Is it a crime for a father to want to see his daughter?" "Stepfather," I corrected. "And yes, when that father has been silent for 1,000 days and only reappears when a magazine mentions I am wealthy. It warrants a question." "It was not the magazine," Arthur lied, waving his hand dismissively. "We have been planning this trip for months. The article was just a happy coincidence. It reminded us that life is short. Family is the most important thing. Edith, you can have all this." He gestured vaguely at the house, but without family to share it with, it is just cold concrete. We wanted to reconnect. We are getting older. Your mother and I, we want to be close to our children. "Close," I repeated. "Okay, so you drove here for a hug?" Marilyn stepped in, sensing Arthur was losing the narrative. "Edith, please, do not be so hard on him. We really did miss you. And well, We thought since we were coming out this way, maybe we could discuss some things, family things. What kind of family things? I asked. Marilyn bit her lip. She looked at Justin. Go on, honey. Tell your sister. Justin straightened up. He adjusted his jacket, putting on his entrepreneur face, the same face he wore when he tried to convince me that selling herbal supplements was a path to financial freedom. Look, Edith, Justin began, leaning forward on the island. I know we have had our differences. I know you think I am just playing around. But I am on to something big, huge. I am pivoting. The crypto market was a learning experience, okay? But the real money is in AI-driven content generation. I have a business plan. I have the developers lined up. It is a guaranteed 10 times return on investment within 6 months. I stared at him. You want money? I want an investment, Justin corrected, looking offended. I am offering you a seat at the table. Series B funding. I need a bridge loan to get the servers running. It is a small amount for someone like you. Pocket change. Really? How much? I asked. $65,000, Justin said. He said it quickly, as if saying it fast made the number smaller. And I will give you, let us say, 5% equity in the company. That is generous. Edith, normally I would not give up that much control. I did the math in my head. $65,000 was exactly the amount of debt Leo had uncovered in his background check. It wasn't for servers. It was to pay off the sharks before they broke his legs. $65,000, I repeated slowly, for 5% of a company that does not exist. It exists in here, Justin said, tapping his temple. And on my laptop. Come on, Edith. You just bought a sculpture that probably cost that much. Help your brother out. It is a win-win. I looked at him. I looked at the desperation hiding behind his arrogance. No, I said. Justin blinked. What? No, I said again. I am not investing. I am not lending. The answer is no. The air in the room shifted. The pretense of a business meeting evaporated. Justin's face turned an ugly shade of red. You are kidding, he spat. Look at this place. You have millions buried in the floorboards, and you will not help your own brother with a measly 65 grand? I would not give you 65 cents, Justin, I said calmly, because I know where it is going. It is going to pay the debts you racked up gambling on digital monkeys. Justin's mouth fell open. How did you— I am a data architect, I reminded him. I know everything. Arthur slammed his hand on the counter. Enough. The sound rang through the room like a gunshot. Enough of this selfishness. Edith, you think you are so high and mighty because you have money? You think that makes you better than us? I think it makes me solvent, I said, which is more than I can say for you. Arthur's face turned purple. He took a step toward me, then stopped, remembering where he was. He took a deep breath, visibly forcing himself to switch tactics. The anger vanished, replaced by a smooth, terrifyingly rational tone. This was Arthur the salesman, the closer. Edith, he said, lowering his voice to a reasonable baritone. Listen to me. We are not just here for Justin. We are here for you. For me? I raised an eyebrow. Yes, Arthur said, gesturing around the room. Look at this place. Really look at it. It is cold. It is sterile. It is a museum, not a home. It is 15,000 square feet of glass and concrete. And you are here all alone. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? How lonely? I like the quiet, I said. You think you do, Arthur said, shaking his head with pity. But you are compensating. You are trying to fill a hole in your heart with expensive things, but it is not working. We can see that. You are unhappy. Edith, I almost laughed. I am incredibly happy. No, you are overwhelmed, Arthur insisted. And frankly, this house is a mistake. It is a financial sinkhole. The upkeep alone must be astronomical. You are bleeding money to maintain a fortress that you do not need. He paused, leaning in closer. So, Here is what we are going to do. We have been talking about it. Your mother and I. We have a solution. A solution, I said, my voice dangerously soft. Yes, Arthur said, smiling as if he were bestowing a great gift. You sell this place. The market is hot right now. You could probably get 16 or 17 million for it if we market it right. I can help with that. I know how to talk to people. He continued, gaining momentum. You take that money. You pay off Justin's little debt. It is a family expense, after all. Then, you buy a nice, sensible house, something with 4 or 5 bedrooms, maybe a ranch style. And here's the best part. We move in. I stared at him. I physically could not blink. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was mesmerizing. You move in, I repeated. Exactly. Arthur beamed. We sell the house in Ohio. It is a wreck anyway, and we come here. Mom can cook for you. I can handle the maintenance of the property so you do not get ripped off by contractors. Justin can have the basement for his studio. We will be a family again. Edith, we will take care of you. You will never have to be lonely in a big, scary glass box again. He spread his hands wide. It is the only logical move. You have the capital. We have the time and the love. We merge our assets. We become a team. Marilyn nodded eagerly beside him. It would be so nice. Edith, I could make you breakfast every morning, just like when you were little. I hated your breakfast, I said. You burned the toast, every single day. Marilyn's smile faltered. I looked at Arthur. I looked at Justin. They were looking at me with expectant, greedy eyes. They truly believed this was a reasonable proposal. They believed that I should liquidate my empire, my sanctuary, my masterpiece, to buy a commune where I could serve as their financier, and they could serve as my family. They wanted to consume me. They didn't want a reunion. They wanted a host. I set my glass of water down on the counter. The sound of the crystal hitting the marble was the only sound in the room. Let me clarify something, I said. My voice was no longer flat. It was cold, absolute zero. You want me to sell my home that I built with my own money. You want me to use the proceeds to pay off your son's gambling debts, and then you want me to buy a smaller house so you can live in it rent-free and manage my life? We would be taking care of you, Arthur insisted. It is what families do. No, Arthur, I said. That is what parasites do. The word hung in the air. Parasites, Justin sneered. Nice, really nice. It is the correct biological term, I said. An organism that lives in or on an organism of another species and benefits by deriving nutrients at the other's expense. How dare you, Marilyn whispered, clutching her pearls. I dare because I have the data, I said. And since we are talking about assets and liabilities, I think it is time you saw the full report. I reached under the counter and pressed a button. The lights in the room dimmed slightly. A section of the wall paneling slid back to reveal a 100-inch screen that I usually used for market analysis. Sit down, I said. Or stand. I do not care. But you are going to watch this. Watch what? Arthur demanded, looking nervous for the first time. What is this? This, I said, is your quarterly review. I signaled to the hidden door on the left. It opened, and Leo stepped out. He was wearing a charcoal suit that was tailored to perfection. He held a thick leather binder in his hand. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like an executioner. Who the hell is that? Justin asked, stepping back. This is Leo, I said. My legal counsel, and he has some very interesting charts to show you. The trap had snapped shut. They just didn't know it yet. They thought they were negotiating a real estate deal. They were about to find out they were the defendants in a trial they had already lost. Leo stepped into the light of the great room with the silent precision of a shark entering a reef. He placed the heavy leather binder on the kitchen island with a sound that was soft yet undeniably final. It was the sound of a gavel hitting a block, wrapped in velvet. Arthur recoiled slightly. his eyes darting between me and the tall, impeccably dressed man who had just materialized from my library. "Who is this?" Arthur demanded, his voice pitching up an octave. He pointed a trembling finger at Leo. "Is this your husband? Is this the man who actually pays for all of this?" It was a telling assumption. In Arthur's worldview, a woman could not possibly own a fortress of this magnitude without a man signing the checks. To him, I was still just the stepdaughter who fixed the Wi-Fi. Surely. A patriarch had to be behind the curtain. Leo did not smile. He adjusted his cufflinks, revealing a watch that was worth more than Justin's entire fictional company. "I am not her husband, Mr. Miller," Leo said, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that commanded immediate attention. "I am Ms. Fairbanks's legal counsel and asset protection manager, and you are currently trespassing on a corporate asset." "Trespassing?" Arthur sputtered. "We are family. We were invited." "You were invited for a meeting," I interjected, stepping up to the control panel embedded in the marble countertop. "And that meeting has now officially begun. Leo, the exhibits, please." Leo opened the binder. Inside were reams of paper, color-coded and tabbed. He slid a copy toward Arthur, one toward Marilyn, and one toward Justin. "What is this?" Justin asked, looking down at the cover sheet. "Do not open it yet," I commanded. "Look at the screen." I pressed the button on the console. The 100-inch screen that I used to track global money laundering schemes flickered to life. The room dimmed automatically, the automated blinds descending to block out the blinding snow glare, turning the living room into a command center. On the screen, in high-definition clarity, was a title slide: Financial Forensic Audit, The Miller Fairbanks Household, 2023 to 2026. "You audited us?" Marilyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Edith, why would you do that?" "Because you asked for money," I said simply. "And in my world, when someone asks for capital, you conduct due diligence, and what I found was not a tragedy of bad luck, it was a comedy of errors." I tapped the screen. The slide changed. It showed a timeline graph, a red line plummeting downward like a stone dropped off a cliff. "Exhibit A," I said, pointing to the screen. "Arthur Miller, you claim that the bank is predatory. You claim that the adjustable-rate mortgage is what killed your savings. You told me 10 minutes ago that you are drowning because the economy is rigged against the little man." I highlighted a section of the graph dated 6 months ago. "This is the month you missed your mortgage payment," I said. "The payment was $2,400. You claimed you did not have the liquidity." I swiped to the next slide. It was a screenshot of a bank statement, magnified so every transaction was legible. "But on that same day," I continued, my voice devoid of emotion, "your debit card shows 3 separate transactions to the Emerald Isle Online Casino, $500, $800, $1,200. Arthur's face drained of color. He looked like a fish hauled onto a dock, gasping for air. "That was an investment," he stammered. "I had a system. I was trying to double the money to pay the mortgage off early. I was doing it for the family." "You lost it all in 45 minutes, I countered, reading the timestamps. "And then, 3 days later, instead of calling the bank to negotiate, you spent $400 on a survivalist tactical gear set from a website that has since been shut down for fraud. You are not losing your house because of interest rates, Arthur. You are losing it because you are gambling your shelter away on slots and cosplay." Arthur slumped against the counter, unable to look at Marilyn, who was staring at the screen in horror. "I did not know," Marilyn whispered. "He told me the bank lost the check. The data does not lie." "Mom," I said, "but let us move on. Let us talk about the visionary." I turned my gaze to Justin. He was trying to look bored, but a bead of sweat was trickling down his temple. "Slide 2, I announced. The screen changed. This time, it showed a complex web of transaction hashes and wallet addresses. To the untrained eye, it looked like gibberish. To Justin, it must have looked like a nightmare. Justin claims he needs $65,000 for servers and development costs for his AI startup, I said to the room. He claims he is a victim of the crypto crash. I pointed to a specific wallet address displayed in bold font. This is your public wallet address. Justin, you posted it on Twitter 4 years ago asking for donations. You thought because it is crypto. It is anonymous. You forgot that the blockchain is literally a public ledger. It records everything forever. That proves nothing, Justin snapped, his voice cracking. That is just an old wallet. Is it? I asked. Because 3 months ago, Arthur and Mom took out a second mortgage, the one that is now drowning them, and gave you $30,000. They thought it was for business capital. I tapped the screen, and the transaction path animated, a red line tracing the money. Here is the $30,000 entering your wallet, I narrated. And here it is, 2 hours later, leaving your wallet. Did it go to a server farm? Did it go to a developer? The screen displayed the recipient, Luxury Exotic Leasing LLC. You leased a Porsche for the weekend, I said. And then you spent $5,000 at a club in downtown Cleveland called the Velvet Rope. I pulled their transaction logs too. Bottle service, VIP booth. You burned through your parents' lifeline in 48 hours trying to look rich for strangers. Marilyn let out a small, strangled sob. She turned to Justin. You told us the market crashed. You told us the hackers stole it. It is complicated, Mom, Justin shouted, waving his hands frantically. She is twisting the data. It was networking. I had to look successful to attract investors. You have to spend money to make money. You spent their money, I corrected, and you made nothing. You are not an entrepreneur. Justin, you are a financial black hole. Stop it, Justin yelled, slamming his hand on the counter next to Arthur's. You have no right. This is private financial information. You hacked me. I will sue you. This is a violation of the Fourth Amendment or something. It is public data, I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. You put it on the blockchain. You broadcast your transactions to the world every time you buy a coin. All I did was read the book you wrote. Do not blame the reader for the plot holes. I looked at them. The father who gambled the mortgage, the brother who partied away the bailout, and the mother who believed them both because it was easier than facing the truth. You are not poor because of the economy, I said, delivering the verdict. You are not poor because of bad luck. You are poor because you are incompetent, greedy, and delusional. You manage your lives like a Ponzi scheme, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And now you have run out of Peters, and you thought I would be the ultimate Peter. Edith, Marilyn wept, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Please, stop. Why are you doing this? We are your family. Why do you have to be so cold, so calculating? Calculating? I repeated the word. It hung in the air, sharp and metallic. Yes, Marilyn cried. You treat everything like a math problem. We are human beings. We make mistakes. Why can't you just love us instead of auditing us? Because calculation is the only reason I'm standing here, I said. And lack of calculation is the reason you are about to be homeless. I walked over to the console one last time. But I am not done. Because of the financial incompetence I could forgive, I could write that off as stupidity. But there is one thing I cannot write off. What more is there? Arthur groaned, his head in his hands. The emotional fraud, I said. I pressed the button. The screen went black for a second, then refreshed with a new slide. This one was different. It wasn't numbers. It was text. Source: Fairbanks Miller Clan Group. Chat: archived, deleted. You thought because I left the group chat, I could not see what you wrote, I said. You thought because you deleted the messages, they were gone, but nothing is ever truly deleted. Is it, Justin? Not when you back up your phone to the cloud without encryption. I read the first message aloud. It was dated 3 days after I moved to Utah. Arthur: Good riddance. At least we do not have to listen to her whine about her boring job anymore. She will be back in 6 months when she fails. She has zero social skills. I read the second one. This one was from Justin, dated a year ago, when they first started having money trouble. Justin, do not worry. Dad, if we get really stuck, we can just guilt trip Edith. She is a cash cow. She is desperate for Mom's approval. I can play her like a fiddle. Just tell her you are sick or something. And then the third one, the one that actually hurt. Even now, even with my armor on. It was from Marilyn. Marilyn. I know, Justin. But you know how she is. She is such a cold fish. Sometimes I wonder if she is even really my daughter. She has none of my warmth. She is just hard, like a stone. The room was silent. Deadly, suffocatingly silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan. Marilyn stared at the screen, her face pale as a sheet. She recognized her own words. She remembered typing them. Marilyn stammered. Edith, I was upset. I didn't mean. You meant every word, I said. You called me a cash cow. You called me a cold fish. You bet on my failure. I turned to face them fully, my back to the screen, letting the hateful words float above my head like a halo of truth. You did not come here to reconnect, I said. You came here to harvest the cash cow. You thought I was still the desperate little girl who would fix your dishwasher just to hear you say good job. You thought you could play me. I gestured to Leo. But you forgot one thing. The cash cow learned how to read the butcher's manual. Justin looked at the screen, then at me. The arrogance was gone. The entrepreneur mask had crumbled. He looked like a child who had been caught stealing from the collection plate. That is illegal, he whispered, but there was no force behind it. You cannot read our private messages. Sue me, I said. Please, I would love to introduce this evidence in a court of law. Imagine the judge's face when he sees you plotting to defraud a family member. Leo, what is the penalty for conspiracy to commit fraud across state lines? Leo did not even look at a book. Wire fraud statutes are quite severe, he said calmly. Up to 20 years in federal prison, and since you discussed it on a digital platform and then crossed state lines to execute the plan, it falls under federal jurisdiction. Arthur looked up, terror in his eyes. Prison? We are not criminals, Marilyn shrieked. We just wanted a loan. You conspired to manipulate me based on false pretenses, I said. You lied about the business. You lied about the affection. That is fraud. I walked over to the table where the binder lay open. I closed it with a snap. But I am not going to send you to prison, I said. That would be a waste of taxpayer money. And frankly, you are not worth the legal fees. Then what do you want? Arthur asked, his voice trembling. I want a trade, I said. I looked at Leo. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single, thin document. He placed it on the counter. This, I said, is a settlement agreement. Settlement? Justin asked. We didn't sue you. No, I said. I am settling your debts, but the price is not money. The price is your total, permanent absence. They looked at the document. They looked at me. The gravity of the situation was finally sinking in. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the daughter. I was the entity that held their fate in my hands. And I had just presented the only exit strategy they were going to get. The sound of Arthur's hand hitting the surface of the kitchen island was not the thunderous crash of authority he intended. It was a sharp, ugly crack of bone against stone, followed immediately by the sickening screech of his wedding ring dragging across the walnut veneer of the lower cabinetry. I looked down. There was a scratch. It was 3 inches long, a jagged white scar in the deep, hand-polished wood that I had imported from a sustainable forest in Brazil. Arthur did not look at the damage. He was breathing heavily, his face a mottled map of red rage and purple desperation, the logic of the graphs, the shame of the text messages, the cold, hard reality of the blockchain. None of it had penetrated the fortress of his entitlement. When facts failed him, Arthur resorted to the only tool he had ever truly mastered: volume. I do not care about your papers, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips and landing on the pristine countertop. I do not care about your graphs or your audits. I am your father. I raised you. I put a roof over your head. You have a duty, a moral duty. He leaned in, his eyes bulging. I want that money, Edith, and I want it right now. I am not leaving this house until you write a check. You think you are so smart with your fancy words and your lawyer in a suit? You are nothing without us. You are just a selfish little girl playing dress-up in a glass box. Marilyn was weeping silently, her hands covering her face, but she did not stop him. She never stopped him. Her silence was her signature on his permission slip. Justin stood behind them, his arms crossed, vibrating with a mix of fear and adrenaline, waiting to see if the brute force attack would crack the firewall. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at the scratch on the wood, calculated the cost of refinishing it, approximately $1,200, and then looked up at Arthur. You want the money from the house, I stated, my voice devoid of inflection. You want me to sell the glass fortress to pay for your gambling and Justin's vanity? Yes, Arthur bellowed. It is just a building. Family is blood. Well, I said, stepping back and gesturing to the expansive room, to the steel beams and the towering glass walls. There is a significant technical problem with that plan. Arthur, a fatal error in your operating system. I turned to Leo. Leo, please explain the ownership structure of this property to Mr. Miller. Use small words. Leo stepped forward. He did not look at Arthur. He looked through him. He opened a new file in his binder, extracting a document with a heavy, embossed seal. Mr. Miller, Leo began, his tone clinical. You seem to be under the impression that Ms. Fairbanks owns this property. Arthur blinked, the rage momentarily stalled by confusion. Of course she owns it. We are standing in it. She bought the art. She pays the bills. Incorrect, Leo said. Ms. Fairbanks is the primary beneficiary of a resident trust. However, the legal title to the land, the structure, and all contents therein is held by the ironclad irrevocable trust, a legal entity domiciled in the Cook Islands. What the hell does that mean? Justin asked. Stepping forward. Stop speaking legalese. Does she own the house or not? It means, I interjected, taking control of the narrative, that I do not own a single brick of this place. I do not own the sofa you almost sat on. I do not own the glass you are drinking from. The trust owns it all. Arthur looked around wildly, as if the walls were suddenly shifting. So? You control the trust. Just tell it to sell. That is the beauty of an irrevocable trust, Arthur, I said, leaning against the counter and crossing my arms. I cannot tell it to do anything. I am not the trustee. I gave up control the moment I signed the deed. The trustee is an independent third-party firm based in Zurich. Their only mandate is to preserve the asset. I watched the information hit them. They were trying to process it, trying to find the loophole. But you can ask them, Marilyn cried out, clutching at straws. If you tell them it is an emergency? If you tell them your parents are in trouble? I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a chess player who had seen checkmate 10 moves ago. Actually, Mom, that brings us to the most interesting clause in the trust agreement, I said. Leo, read Article 4, Section B, the duress protocol. Leo lifted the document and began to read. His voice was steady, rhythmic, and terrifyingly precise. Article 4, Section B, the anti-duress and extortion provision. In the event that the beneficiary, that is Ms. Fairbanks, requests a liquidation of assets, a withdrawal of principal, or a modification of the trust terms for the stated or suspected purpose of satisfying the demands of family members, relatives, or known associates, the trust shall immediately enter a state of lockdown. Leo paused for effect. The room was so quiet, I could hear the wind howling outside the glass. Go on, I said. During a lockdown state, Leo continued, all assets are frozen. Furthermore, If the trustee determines that the beneficiary is under emotional, physical, or psychological duress from said family members, a poison pill mechanism is automatically triggered. Poison pill? Justin whispered. The trust mandates, Leo read, that, in such an event, 20% of the liquid assets held by the trust shall be immediately and automatically donated to a designated charitable organization to ensure the funds cannot be accessed by the coercing parties. Arthur's mouth fell open. You are lying. No one writes a contract like that. I do, I said. I wrote the code for the contract myself, and Leo translated it into legalese. It is airtight. Arthur, it is a self-executing defensive algorithm. And who? Arthur swallowed hard, his greed battling his fear. Who is the charity? I looked him dead in the eye. The Northern Utah Senior Dog Rescue and Rehabilitation Center. Dogs? Arthur choked out. You would give our money to dogs? It is not your money, I reminded him. And yes, if you pressure me, if you threaten me, if you refuse to leave, I do not just say no, the system says no, and then the system takes $2 million and buys premium kibble for abandoned golden retrievers. Do you want to test it? Because the trustee is watching. The security cameras are linked directly to their server in Zurich. They are watching you scream at me right now. They are probably drafting the donation check as we speak. Arthur backed away from the counter as if it were radioactive. He looked at the ceiling, expecting to see the invisible eyes of the Zurich bankers judging him. He looked at Justin. He looked at Marilyn. They were paralyzed. I had stripped them of their only weapon. They could not use guilt because guilt triggered the freeze. They could not use force because force triggered the donation. I had turned their own greed into the trigger for their destruction. This is insane, Justin muttered, running a hand through his hair. You rigged your own life so you cannot help us? That is psychotic. Edith, it is architectural, I corrected. I built a structure that cannot be breached by the specific type of storm you bring. It is not psychosis. Justin, it is engineering. Arthur slumped. The fight went out of him. He looked old. Suddenly, the bluster evaporated, leaving only a tired, broke man in a coat that was too tight. So that is it? He whispered. You are just going to let us lose the house? You are going to let us go bankrupt? No, I said. I signaled to Leo again. Now, we move to phase 2. Leo placed a second document on the counter, right next to the scratch Arthur had made. This document was thinner, cleaner. It did not have the heavy seal of the trust. It was a standard, brutal legal agreement. I am not going to let you starve, I said. And I am not going to let the bank take the house while you are still inside it. That is messy. I do not like messes. You will help? Marilyn asked, hope flaring in her eyes like a match in a wind tunnel. I will complete a transaction, I said. Leo, the terms. Leo tapped the document. This is a settlement and release agreement combined with a non-disclosure agreement and a voluntary restraining order. Restraining order? Arthur bristled. Voluntary, Leo repeated, meaning you agree to it, you sign it, and it becomes a court order. Here is the deal, I said, stepping forward so I was only a few feet away from them. I will pay off the $65,000 you owe. I will wire it directly to the bank to clear the mortgage arrears, and I will pay the collections agency for Justin's debt. No cash goes to you. Not a cent touches your hands. Okay, Arthur said, nodding quickly. Okay, that is good. We can work with that. Wait, I said, raising a hand. That is the payment. Now comes the product. I pointed to the papers. In exchange for that $65,000, you sign this, all three of you. What does it say? Justin asked, squinting at the text. It says you disappear, I said. My voice was as cold as the snow on the other side of the glass. It says that from the moment you sign, you are no longer my family. You are strangers. I began to list the terms, counting them off on my fingers. 1. You never contact me again. No texts, no calls, no emails, no letters. You block my number. You delete my contact info. 2. You never come within 100 miles of Park City, Utah. If your GPS even drifts into the state, I will be notified. 3. You never speak my name to the press, to social media, or to your neighbors. You do not tell Aunt Paula about my house. You do not brag about your rich daughter. As far as the world is concerned, Edith Fairbanks is dead to you. 4. If you violate any of these terms, if you send one text, if Justin posts one photo of this house online, the $65,000 becomes a loan with 20% compound interest, retroactive to today, and I will foreclose on your house in Ohio faster than you can blink. I stared at them. Total silence, total separation, forever. That is the price. Marilyn began to cry again, but this time it was a soft, defeated weeping. Edith, you cannot mean that. You are asking us to sell our daughter. I am asking you to acknowledge reality, I said. You sold me years ago, Mom. You sold me for Arthur's ego. You sold me for Justin's comfort. You sold me every time you let me fix your mess and ignored my success. I am just formalizing the sale. I am finally getting a receipt. Arthur looked at the paper. He looked at the scratch on the table. He looked at the $65,000 of debt that was crushing his lungs. He looked at his wife, who was broken. He looked at his son, who was a failure. He knew he had no leverage. He knew he was standing in a fortress designed to keep him out. 65,000, Arthur muttered. Cleared? Today? Within the hour, Leo confirmed. Arthur reached out. His hand was shaking. He picked up the pen Leo had placed on the document. It was a heavy black fountain pen. Dad? Justin said, his voice small. Shut up, Justin, Arthur hissed. Do you have 65 grand? No. Do you want to go to jail for fraud? No. We sign. Justin stared at me. For a moment, the shroud of his delusion lifted. He looked at the sister he had mocked, the typist, the cold fish. He looked at the empire I had built and the wall I was erecting between us. He snatched the paper from the counter, reading the clause about the permanent non-contact order. You are buying your freedom, Justin said, his voice filled with a strange mixture of disgust and awe. You are literally paying us to pretend you do not exist. I nodded slowly. I did not blink. I did not look away. Yes, Justin, I said, and compared to what it cost me to live with you, it is the cheapest invoice I have ever paid. I tapped the signature line. Sign, or get out and wait for the sheriff to evict you in Ohio. Those are your options. There is no door number 3. Arthur bent down and scrawled his name. The ink was black and permanent. He signed away his daughter to save his house. Marilyn signed next, her tears falling onto the paper, warping the fibers slightly. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. Then it was Justin's turn. He held the pen like a weapon he didn't know how to use. He looked at me one last time, searching for a crack, a flinch, a sign of the sister who used to help him with his homework. He found nothing but a mirror reflecting his own failure. He signed. Leo stepped forward and smoothly removed the documents. He checked the signatures, notarized them with a stamp he pulled from his pocket, and closed the binder. The wire transfer has been initiated, Leo said, tapping his smartwatch. The debt is cleared. The contract is active. I looked at the 3 strangers standing in my kitchen. You have your money, I said. Now, get out of my house. The transaction was complete. I had just purchased the most valuable asset in the world. Absolute, legally binding oblivion. The ink was barely dry. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, suffocating, like the air before a tornado touches down. I watched Arthur stare at his own signature on the document. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving under that cheap, tight coat. He looked at the paper, then he looked at me, and then he looked at the check Leo was holding, the digital confirmation of the wire transfer that was queued and ready to clear their debts. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought the transaction had settled. but I had underestimated the volatility of a narcissist who has just been forced to admit he has no value. Arthur's hand shot out. It was a movement of pure, animalistic instinct. He didn't grab the check. He grabbed the settlement agreement from the counter. Right out from under Leo's hand. "No," Arthur rasped. Before Leo could react, Arthur ripped the document in half. The sound of tearing paper was violent, shocking in the quiet acoustics of the glass room. He didn't stop there. He tore it again and again, shredding the legal firewall I had built into confetti, throwing the pieces onto the heated concrete floor. "I do not want your charity," Arthur roared, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of plum. "You think you can buy me? You think you can buy a father's dignity with a few keystrokes?" He slammed his fist onto the marble island again, harder this time, ignoring the pain. "I am not signing away my rights. I am not disappearing. You are my daughter, and you owe us. You owe us everything." "Arthur," I said, my voice calm but tightening, "you just destroyed a $65,000 lifeline. Do you understand what you just did?" "I understand perfectly," he screamed, stepping around the island, encroaching on my space. "I understand that you are trying to cut us out because you are ashamed of us. Well, guess what, Edith? You cannot fire your parents. I will find a lawyer, a real lawyer, not this suit-wearing stooge. I will sue you for everything you have. There are laws. Edith, filial responsibility laws. You cannot just abandon your elderly parents in poverty while you sit here drinking wine in a castle. I will drag you into court, and I will make you pay support every single month for the rest of my life." He was practically spitting the words at me. He looked deranged, fueled by the toxic mixture of humiliation and the sudden realization that he had almost admitted defeat. He took another step toward me, his hands curled into fists. "You ungrateful little—" He lunged. It was a clumsy, desperate motion, an attempt to grab my arm, to shake me, to physically force me to acknowledge his authority. He never reached me. Leo moved with a speed that belied his size. One moment he was standing by the console. The next, he was a solid wall of charcoal wool between me and Arthur. Leo didn't strike him. He simply stepped into the space and used his chest to check Arthur's momentum, forcing the older man backward. Leo stood 6'4", a former collegiate rower who kept himself in fighting shape. Arthur bounced off him like a bird hitting a window. "Step back," Leo said. His voice dropped an octave, losing its polished legal edge and becoming something primal and dangerous. "If you touch her, Mr. Miller, I will not call the police. I will remove you from this mountain myself." Arthur stumbled back, catching himself on the edge of the sofa. He looked at Leo, then at me, panting. The physical intimidation had failed. Then, a laugh cut through the tension. It was a high, jagged sound. Justin was leaning against the window, phone in hand. He wasn't filming anymore. He was typing. "Let him sue her, Dad," Justin said, a cruel smirk twisting his face. "But that takes too long. I have a better idea." He held up his phone, the screen glowing bright against the dim room. "You want to play hardball, Edith? Let us play. You care about your reputation, right? Obsidian Shield relies on trust, privacy, integrity." Justin took a step forward, emboldened by his own malice. "I have 50,000 followers across my platforms. Maybe they are not investors, but they are loud. I am going to tell them everything. I am going to post a video right now. The truth about Edith Fairbanks, the billionaire who lets her parents starve. I will show them the house. I will tell them how you forced us to sign NDAs. I will paint you as the coldest, most heartless monster in the tech world. Cancel culture is real. Sis, by tomorrow morning, your clients will be asking why they are trusting their security to a woman who hates her own family. I will ruin you," Justin promised, his voice dripping with venom. "Unless you double the offer, 130,000, cash, and no banishment. We stay. We live here. or I hit post. Arthur straightened up. Seeing a new path to victory. That is right, he sneered. The world will know who you really are. I looked at them. I looked at the shredded paper on the floor. I looked at Arthur's red face and Justin's smug grin. They really thought they had won. They thought they had found the pressure point. They thought that because I had tried to be civil, I was weak. I let out a long, slow sigh. It was the sigh of a demolition expert who realizes the building cannot be saved and must be imploded. I had hoped I would not have to use this, I said quietly. I really did. I wanted to give you a clean exit. I wanted to let you keep your dignity. I walked back to the control console. My hand hovered over the touch panel. You threatened to sue me, I said to Arthur, and you threatened to destroy my reputation. I said to Justin, you have moved from negotiation to extortion. That changes the parameters of our interaction. Go ahead, Justin challenged. Call the cops. By the time they get up the driveway, the video will be viral. I am not calling the police, I said. I am calling the bank. I pressed the button. The screen on the wall, which had been black, flared to life one last time. It was a single slide. No graphs. No timelines. Just a logo. It was a logo they had seen before. A stylized phoenix rising from flames, printed in dark red and gray. Phoenix Asset Management, LLC. Below the logo was a subtitle. A wholly owned subsidiary of the Ironclad Trust. Arthur frowned, squinting at the screen. What is this? What is Phoenix Asset Management? You recognize the name, do not you? Arthur? I asked softly. You should. They are the ones calling your house 5 times a day. They are the ones who sent the foreclosure notice you hid in the kitchen drawer. They are the ones holding the note on your second mortgage. Arthur went still. They bought the debt from the bank. Yes, I said. Banks hate bad debt. They hate chasing people like you who do not pay. So they sell those debts to collection agencies for pennies on the dollar. Phoenix Asset Management is a distressed debt buyer. They specialize in acquiring high-risk portfolios. I tapped the screen, and a list of account numbers appeared. I own Phoenix Asset Management. Arthur, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of their lungs. I established the company 6 months ago, I explained, my voice clinical and precise. Its sole purpose was to quietly acquire every single liability attached to the names Arthur Miller, Marilyn Fairbanks, and Justin Miller. I bought your mortgage. I bought your credit card debt. I bought the personal loan you took out for the boat you never used. I turned to Justin. He had lowered his phone. And you, Justin, I continued. I bought the collections account for your student loans. I bought the judgment from that landlord you stiffed 3 years ago. And most importantly, I bought the debt from the crypto exchange you leveraged yourself into. The $65,000 you owe, you do not owe it to some faceless corporation. You owe it to me. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. For the first time, I let the full weight of my power radiate outward. I am not just your daughter, I said, my voice vibrating with controlled intensity. I am your creditor. I am the institution. I own the roof over your head in Ohio. I own the car you drove here in. I own the very shirt on your back if I decide to liquidate your assets. Arthur braced himself against the sofa, his legs giving way. He sank down onto the velvet cushions he had been afraid to touch earlier. His face was gray. You own the debt? He whispered. Every cent, I confirmed. And here's the reality of your situation. You threaten to sue me? Go ahead. The moment you file a paper. I will file for immediate foreclosure on the Ohio house. I will expedite the eviction. I will have the sheriff put your furniture on the curb by Friday morning. I turned to Justin. And you want to post a video? You want to talk about truth? Let us talk about truth. I have the forensic file on your business expenses. I have proof that you solicited investments for a company that was never incorporated. That is securities fraud. Justin, that is a federal crime. Justin flinched as if I had slapped him. If you post one word about me, I said, if you upload 1 second of video, I will not just sue you for defamation. I will hand over your entire financial history to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I will hand it to the IRS. I will make sure you are not just bankrupt, but incarcerated. The color had drained from Justin's face so completely, he looked like a wax figure. He dropped his hand, sliding the phone into his pocket as if it burned him. You set us up, Justin stammered. I prepared for contingencies, I corrected. I knew who you were. I knew that eventually, your greed would bring you to my doorstep, and I knew that gratitude would never be enough to control you. I needed leverage, absolute, crushing leverage. I looked at Marilyn. She was sitting next to Arthur, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. She looked at me like I was a stranger, a titan she had accidentally birthed. Edith, she whispered, we are your parents. And that is the only reason you are not already on the street, I said. Any other debtor who treated me this way would have been liquidated months ago. I walked back to the island and picked up the pieces of the torn agreement. I held them up. Arthur tore up the peace treaty, I said. He chose war, but in this war, I have nuclear weapons, and you have sticks and stones. I dropped the torn paper into the trash bin built into the counter. So, the deal has changed, I announced. The $65,000 payoff? That is off the table. I am not paying your debts anymore. I am keeping them. What? Arthur croaked. But you said... I said I would clear them if you signed and disappeared, I replied. You tore up the contract, so now I keep the debt. I remain your creditor. You will go back to Ohio. You will live in that house only because I allow it. You will drive that car only because I permit it. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the cool marble. You will live the rest of your lives knowing that I hold the axe every time you think about calling me. You will remember the mortgage every time you think about bad-mouthing me to Aunt Paula. You will remember the foreclosure notice every time you think about posting on social media. Justin, you will remember the SEC. I own you, I said. Not emotionally, not filially, financially, and that is a bond you cannot break with a tantrum. Arthur looked up at me. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. The rage was gone. All that was left was the hollow, shaking fear of a man who realizes he is standing on a trapdoor and the rope is in the hands of the person he abused. Please, Arthur whispered. It was the first honest word he had said all day. Please, Edith, do not take the house. It is all we have. Then you know what you have to do, I said. I signaled to Leo. He reached into his briefcase again. He didn't pull out a settlement agreement this time. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a confession of judgment, Leo said. It acknowledges the debt, it acknowledges the fraud, and it grants Ms. Fairbanks immediate power of attorney to liquidate your assets in the event of any breach of confidentiality. He placed it on the table. Sign it, I ordered. And then get out of my sight before I change my mind and decide that I would rather have the tax write-off than your obedience. Arthur didn't argue. He didn't scream. He didn't look for a loophole. He pulled himself up from the sofa, his movements slow and jerky like an old man. He walked to the counter. He picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly he had to use his other hand to steady it. He signed. He was not signing a deal this time. He was signing a surrender. He was acknowledging that the power dynamic had shifted permanently. He was no longer the father scolding the child. He was the subject bowing to the sovereign. Justin signed next, without a word, his eyes fixed on the floor. He knew his life as a visionary was over. He was now just a debtor on a leash. I watched them. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I just felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a system working exactly as designed. The variables had been accounted for. The threat had been neutralized. The ledger was balanced. The printer hidden within the mahogany cabinetry whirred softly, a polite mechanical whisper that birthed the final instrument of their surrender. It was the only sound in the room, contrasting sharply with the ragged breathing of the 3 people huddled by the kitchen island. Leo retrieved the document from the tray. The paper was warm. He placed it on the marble slab, smoothing it out with a deliberate, confident hand. This was not the settlement agreement Arthur had torn up in his fit of rage. That document had offered a clean break, a zeroing of the ledger in exchange for distance. That offer was dead, shredded on the floor like confetti. This new document was different. It was colder. It was harder. It was a leash. "Read it," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. "The terms have changed." Arthur leaned over the paper, his eyes squinting, his hands gripping the edge of the counter to keep himself upright. "There is no lump sum," I explained, outlining the brutality of their new reality. "There is no cash transfer to your accounts. There is no $65,000 for you to manage or mishandle. Instead, Phoenix Asset Management, that is to say, I, will restructure your debt." I pointed to the second paragraph. "I will pay the bank directly to stop the foreclosure. I will pay the collections agencies directly to stop the lawsuits. You will not see a single penny. You will live in that house in Ohio because I allow you to live there. You will drive that car because I allow you to keep the keys. But make no mistake, I own the mortgage, I own the liens, and I own you." I looked at Justin. "And for you, the entrepreneur, there is a special clause. Mandatory credit counseling, monthly financial audit submitted to Leo's firm. If you spend more than $50 on entertainment or crypto without authorization, the forbearance ends, and I garnish your wages. If you do not have wages, I liquidate your assets." "That is slavery," Justin whispered, his face pale. "That is accountability," I corrected. "Something you have avoided for 33 years. I tapped the bottom of the page where 3 blank lines waited. "And finally, the non-negotiable condition, the banishment. You leave here today, you never return, you never call, you never text, you never speak my name. If you do, if there is a single breach of this protocol, the debt becomes due in full, immediately, with interest, and I will take the house." I held out the pen. It was a heavy black Mont Blanc, cold to the touch. "Sign it," I said, "or start walking back to Ohio in the snow." Marilyn was the first to move. She did not look at Arthur for permission. She did not look at Justin for validation. She looked at me. Her eyes were red, rimmed with the salt of tears that were decades overdue. In her gaze, I saw the crushing realization of what she had lost. She wasn't just losing a daughter's financial support. She was realizing she had lost the daughter herself long ago, traded away for the comfort of a man who had just led them off a cliff. "Edith," she said, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind, "I am sorry." "Sign the paper, Marilyn," I said. I did not call her mom. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook, but she pressed the nib to the paper. She signed her name. It was a surrender of rights, an admission that she was no longer a parent, but a dependent. She stepped back, sobbing quietly into her hands, knowing this was the only lifeboat left in the ocean they had drowned in. Next was Justin. He walked to the counter like a man walking to the gallows. The arrogance that had defined him, the swagger, the live streaming, the talk of vision, had been surgically removed. He looked down at the paper. He looked at the clause that gave me oversight of his bank account. He was seeing the death of his fantasy. There would be no Lamborghinis. There would be no VIP booths. There would be only the long, gray road of repayment to a sister he had mocked. He gripped the pen so hard his knuckles turned white. He scrawled his signature, a jagged, angry mark. He dropped the pen as if it burned him, staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. He was no longer the golden boy. He was a bad investment that had finally been written down. Then it was Arthur, the patriarch, the man who had sat in his recliner and told me my work was meaningless typing, the man who had demanded respect without ever earning it. He looked at the document. He looked at the scratch he had made on my table. Then he looked at me. There was no fatherly affection in his eyes. There was no anger, even There was only the look of a man who recognizes his owner. It was the look a debtor gives to the bank manager who holds the deed. He realized, in that final moment, that my typing had built a cage, and his greed had walked him right into it. He picked up the pen. He didn't say a word. He didn't try to negotiate. He signed. I watched the ink dry. It was done. The legal shackles were locked. "Leo," I said, "take the document." Leo stepped forward and secured the file in his briefcase. I looked at the three of them. They looked small. They looked gray against the vibrant, expensive backdrop of my home. They were glitches in the system, and I had just patched the code. "Now," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "Get out of my house." They didn't argue. They didn't linger. They turned and began the long walk to the front door. They moved with the shuffling gait of the defeated. Marilyn clutched her fake designer bag to her chest. Arthur kept his head down, staring at his wet boots. As they passed the dining area, Justin paused. His eyes darted to the table where a bottle of premium imported spring water sat, a glass bottle that cost more than his lunch. His hand twitched. Instinctively, he reached out to grab it, a petty act of theft to soothe his bruised ego, a tiny trophy to take from the castle. Leo cleared his throat. It was a sharp, percussive sound. Justin froze. He looked up and saw Leo watching him with a look of absolute, terrifying boredom. Leo didn't move a muscle. He just raised one eyebrow. Justin pulled his hand back. He hung his head and kept walking. I followed them to the entryway. I stood by the open door, letting the biting wind swirl around me. The snow was falling harder now, a white curtain closing on the world. They stepped out into the cold. Arthur fumbled with his keys. Marilyn shivered, wrapping her thin coat tighter around herself. They didn't look back. They couldn't. To look back would be to see what they had thrown away. I watched them trudge to the rental car. The beige sedan looked pathetic sitting on the cobblestones of the motor court, covered in a fresh layer of snow. They got in. The doors slammed shut. I reached out and took hold of the heavy oak door of my home. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a deliberate, steady push. Click. The magnetic lock engaged. The steel bolt slid into place with a heavy, solid thud that resonated through the frame. It was a mechanical sound, cold and precise, but to me, it was a symphony. It was the sound of a severance package. It was the sound of the past being sealed off in an airtight container. I stood there for a moment, looking through the narrow glass panel next to the door. I watched the rental car start up, a puff of gray exhaust coughing into the pristine mountain air. The tires spun for a second on the snow before finding traction on the heated driveway I had paid for. They began the descent, the taillights glowing like two angry red eyes in the storm. I watched until they rounded the first bend and disappeared behind the line of pine trees. They were gone. They were heading back to the gray skies of Ohio, back to their debt, back to the small, loud life they had chosen. I waited for the sadness. I waited for the guilt, the old familiar weight that had sat on my chest since I was 12 years old. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange, effervescent lightness. My lungs expanded. The air in the house felt cleaner, as if their departure had cycled the oxygen. I turned around. The great room was warm and golden. The fire was crackling in the hearth. Leo was standing by the kitchen island. He wasn't holding a file anymore. He was holding 2 glasses of the vintage Bordeaux I had opened earlier. The real wine, not the tap water. He walked over to me and held out a glass. "To liquidity?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. I took the glass. The crystal was cool in my hand. "No," I said. "To solvency." We clinked glasses. The chime was pure and clear. I took a sip. The wine was complex, rich, and deeply satisfying. It tasted like victory. I walked over to the main control panel on the wall. I pulled my phone from my pocket one last time. I opened my contacts. I selected Arthur, delete. I selected Marilyn, delete. I selected Justin, delete. Then I opened the group chat. the archive of their complaints, their demands, their little cruelties. I didn't just leave the group. I selected the option to delete the conversation history from my device. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this conversation?" the screen asked. I tapped S. The screen cleared. It was blank. Pure, beautiful white space. I slid the phone into my pocket. I looked up at the vast glass wall. Outside, the storm was raging, a chaotic whirl of white and black, but inside, everything was still. Everything was controlled. Everything was mine. "System," I said aloud, my voice clear and commanding in the large room. The house. I chirped softly, listening. "Activate absolute privacy mode," I ordered. Confirming, the cool voice replied, lowering blackout shades, disabling exterior guest access, rerouting all incoming calls to legal counsel, privacy mode active, around the room. The heavy, automated shades began to descend, shutting out the storm, shutting out the world, shutting out the view of the road that led back to the past. The lights in the house dimmed to a warm, amber glow. I stood in the center of my $15 million fortress. I was alone with Leo. But I wasn't lonely. I was fortified. I had turned my pain into armor, and my neglect into an empire. The silence that filled the room wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of peace. I took another sip of wine and smiled. The ghosts were gone, and they weren't coming back. Thank you so much for listening to this story of revenge and redemption. It is a reminder that sometimes the best payback isn't about hurting others, but about protecting yourself and building a life they can no longer touch. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you tuning in from a busy city, a quiet suburb, or maybe your own fortress of solitude? Drop a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed Edith's journey from the fixer to the owner, please make sure to subscribe to Blue Payback for more stories of justice served cold. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by more people. Your support means the world to us. Stay safe, stay smart, and never let anyone undervalue your worth.